close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. A world where every thought you've ever had, every ache, every joy, every memory could be understood not only by you, but felt deeply, fully, by another human being. That invisible bridge between two minds, a current of understanding that flows quietly beneath the noise of words. This is empathy, not a gentle afterthought, but a force so profound that it reshapes the very architecture of our brains. Empathy is often painted as a soft virtue, a tender kindness reserved for the moments when we pause to console someone else. But neuroscience whispers a different truth. Empathy is not just a fleeting feeling. It is a rewiring, a revival, a reawakening of dormant pathways inside us. It strengthens the circuits that connect thought with emotion, and in doing so, changes how we see, how we choose, and even how we heal. Tonight, we'll wander through the hidden corridors of the mind and explore how empathy revives us, not as some abstract ideal, but as a living, breathing transformation. We'll drift between science and soul, between biology and the infinite ocean of human connection. And as you listen, perhaps you'll notice that the story of empathy is also your story. Etched in every glance, every silence, every heartbeat that has ever resonated with another's pain or joy. So, let us begin. From the moment we open our eyes as infants, before we speak, before we know words, the brain begins a dance of recognition. A mother's gaze, a father's voice, the brush of skin against skin. Each touch and sound becomes a signal, carving grooves into the soft clay of the newborn mind. Scientists call them neural pathways, but in truth, they are much more than that. They are the first sparks of empathy, the opening notes of a lifelong symphony of connection. When a baby cries and the mother's body responds with a surge of oxytocin, we see the primal circuitry of empathy at work. It is not deliberate, it is instinctual, ancient, written into the survival code of our species. The infant learns, my feelings are mirrored. My inner storm does not stay locked inside me, it echoes in the chest of another. This, though unspoken, becomes the foundation of trust, of safety, of belonging. And yet, these sparks do not belong only to infancy. Even as adults, when we enter a room and feel the tension before a single word is spoken, or when a stranger's smile warms us without reason, the brain is replaying this same silent language. It's as though the neurons themselves remember. They remember that connection is not taught, but felt, not explained, but lived. Mirror neurons, nestled deep in our motor cortex, light up when we watch someone else act, or suffer, or rejoice. They blur the line between self and other, teaching us not only to observe, but to feel alongside. When you see someone trip and fall, that twinge in your stomach is not imagination. It is your brain simulating their pain, reminding you that the boundaries of the self are not as rigid as they appear. But here lies the marvel. With every spark of empathy, the brain itself shifts. Dendrites branch outward like roots searching for water. Synapses fire in patterns that have never fired before. The architecture of who you are, your emotions, your responses, your sense of belonging, reshapes itself every time you lean into another's experience. The silent language of empathy does not merely translate feelings. It sculpts the brain into something new, something more awake, more alive. And if you listen carefully, you'll notice something extraordinary. Beneath the silence of the brain's electrical storms, there is a rhythm, steady, patient, insistent. It is the rhythm of recognition, the rhythm of one life finding meaning in another, the rhythm that tells us, you are not alone. You have never been alone, and you will never be alone, so long as empathy continues to spark within you. Think for a moment about electricity, invisible, humming, yet powerful enough to bring light to entire cities. Now, imagine feelings as a current of their own, not confined to the fragile borders of your own body, but capable of leaping, bridging, flowing into another's mind. That is what empathy is. The current of feeling that leaps across the invisible divide between two people, sparking in ways both subtle and immense. When you sit across from someone who is grieving, you might notice your chest tighten, your breath slow. You are not simply observing their sorrow, you are resonating with it. The same neural regions that activate when you yourself are in pain flicker when you witness the pain of another. This is not metaphor, this is biology. Your anterior insula, your anterior cingulate cortex, the very regions that tell you this. Hurts are alive when you watch hurt unfold in someone else. And in that moment, your brain is making a choice. Not a conscious one, but a deep, cellular choice to expand the borders of the self, to let the other in, to redraw the lines so that their suffering becomes, in some way, your own. It is a paradox. Pain divides us when we carry it alone, yet pain shared through empathy becomes lighter, softer, even strangely beautiful, because the current of empathy does more than carry suffering. It carries healing too. When a hand rests gently on yours, or when someone says, "I understand," the brain floods with oxytocin, the bonding hormone. Cortisol, the storm bringer of stress, begins to ebb. Heart rates synchronize, breaths find a rhythm together. The current of feeling becomes a shared heartbeat, a shared nervous system, a shared relief. What is remarkable is how ancient this current truly is. Consider a pack of wolves huddled in snow. When one whimpers, the others do not ignore it. They lean closer, they press their bodies against the one who suffers. In birds, in dolphins, in elephants who mourn their dead, the same current flows. Empathy is not an invention of human culture. It is a survival code written into the marrow of life itself. A recognition that strength is never solitary, but woven from the bonds between. And as we step deeper into this truth, we see how empathy revives the brain not by adding something new, but by restoring something old, something primal, something we often forget in the illusion of our independence. We are not isolated islands, floating in the ocean of existence. We are strands in a vast shimmering web. And every time empathy flows, it lights up the web anew, reminding us that the current was always there, waiting to be felt, waiting to be shared. The more often these shared currents surge, the more durable they become. Neuroplasticity ensures it. Each act of empathy lays down stronger tracks, like pathways through a dense forest becoming clearer each time they are walked. The more we feel with others, the more capable we become of feeling with them again. The current deepens its channel until empathy is no longer a rare spark, but a steady flow that runs through everything we are. And perhaps this is the secret. Empathy does not just connect us to others. It revives us because it reminds us of ourselves, the part of us that has always belonged to the whole. The part that knows healing is not found in isolation, but in the currents that flow between hearts, across silence, and through time itself. Have you ever noticed how a laugh, sudden and genuine, can ripple through a room like a wave, pulling others into its tide? Or how the heaviness of someone's silence can weigh on your own chest, even if no word has been spoken? These are not accidents of mood. They are echoes, the reverberations of another's mind finding resonance within your own. Empathy begins here, in the echo, in the way the brain does not merely observe the world, but reflects it inward, shaping thought and feeling in response. Imagine standing inside a vast canyon, where every sound returns to you, transformed yet familiar. That is how our minds interact with the minds around us, in echoes that remind us we are never sealed within ourselves. Neuroscientists describe this through the lens of synchronization. When two people converse deeply, their brainwaves begin to align. Regions of the brain responsible for understanding language, for processing tone, for weaving meaning. They light up in tandem, as if one mind were playing the melody and the other were instinctively harmonizing. Even the rhythms of breathing and subtle patterns of eye movement begin to mirror each other, In these moments, the echo is not just metaphorical, it is measurable, it is real. But these echoes run deeper than science can easily map. Think of the way you have felt, without explanation, the sorrow of someone you love, even across distance, or the way a work of art, a painting, a song, a simple poem, has stirred something within you that you could not put into words. These too are echoes, though they defy the boundaries of ordinary communication. They suggest that empathy is not only neural, but something more mysterious, something that dwells at the edge of the human spirit. What makes these echoes so vital is not only that they connect us to others, but that they shape us in return. The echoes we allow in become part of our own inner landscape. When we feel another's joy, the brain responds by reinforcing pathways linked to reward and pleasure. When we feel another's grief, the brain strengthens circuits tied to compassion and resilience. We are not static beings merely observing. We are porous, impressionable, sculpted by every echo we let pass through, and therein lies the revival. Each echo is a reminder that empathy is not weakness, nor distraction, nor excess. It is the art of being alive together. To feel another's echo is to carry within you a fragment of their world, a fragment that makes your own world larger, deeper, richer. There is a quiet power in knowing that your mind can reverberate with another's, that you can be both yourself and, for a moment, someone else. It is as though the walls of the self loosen, letting in more light, more air, more possibility. Empathy revives because it expands us. It dissolves the illusion of separateness, letting us hear and be changed by the echoes of another's mind. And if you listen closely, you may notice that your own voice, your own feelings, are echoed back as well. In the gaze of a friend, in the comfort of a stranger's small kindness, in the synchronicity of a shared silence. Empathy is not a one-way current. It is a circle, a rhythm, an endless exchange of echoes that keeps us awake, keeps us whole, keeps us alive. Beneath the poetry of empathy, there is chemistry, a hidden orchestra of molecules that rises and falls with every glance, every touch, every act of understanding. To feel with another is not only an act of spirit, but an alchemy of the brain and body. And this alchemy reveals how empathy revives us, not as a vague idea, but as a physical transformation, often called the bonding hormone. It floods through us in moments of connection, when a mother cradles her child, when two lovers share a gaze, when friends sit quietly in solidarity. Oxytocin is not a soft whisper, it is a tide, lowering the defenses of the amygdala, soothing the storms of fear, making space for trust to take root. With every surge, the brain learns. Connection is safe, compassion is strength. Then there are the endorphins, those subtle waves of relief that echo through the body when empathy eases another's pain. Research shows that helping someone else, even witnessing kindness, can trigger the brain's own natural opiates, binding to receptors that calm stress, dull pain, and brighten mood. It is as though the act of compassion turns the brain into its own healer, rewarding us for reaching outward. And let us not forget dopamine, the messenger of pleasure, of motivation. Acts of empathy light up the reward circuits just as surely as food or song or sunlight. When you comfort someone, when you choose kindness, dopamine whispers, "This matters, this is joy, do it again." Empathy is not merely moral, it is rewarding. At the deepest levels of the brain's design, even serotonin, the steadying tide that regulates mood, finds itself entangled with empathy. Social bonds, trust, and the gentle rhythm of belonging all stabilize serotonin's flow. Without empathy, the system falters, leaving the brain adrift in isolation. With empathy, it revives, weaving calm into the restless currents of thought. But the most fascinating part is this. These chemicals do not act in isolation. They weave together like instruments in an orchestra, creating harmonies that cannot exist alone. Compassion is not just oxytocin, not just dopamine, not just serotonin. It is the symphony of them all, rising in resonance when we lean into the lives of others. And so, when you feel lighter after comforting a friend, when you feel energized by kindness, when your body exhales in the presence of connection, it is not imagination. It is chemistry. It is the body's way of reviving you for having revived someone else. This is why empathy heals not only the one who receives it, but also the one who gives. It is a reciprocal medicine, a loop of healing that passes through both hearts and lingers long after the moment has passed. The brain, like a garden, thrives on such exchanges. Each spark of dopamine is a shaft of sunlight. Each rise of serotonin is the soil steadying itself beneath the roots. Compassion, quite literally, cultivates the brain into something more alive, more fertile, more resilient. And perhaps this is the quiet brilliance of it. Empathy does not ask us to give away pieces of ourselves until nothing remains. It revives by showing us that in giving, we are replenished. In feeling with another, we are not emptied, but filled. Chemistry confirms what the heart has always known, that compassion is not depletion, but abundance. There is a peculiar magic in the way the brain reflects the world back to us, not as a mirror of glass, but as a mirror of flesh and light, where neurons flicker with the lives of others. Scientists call them mirror neurons, cells that activate not only when we move, but when we see another move. Not only when we feel, but when we witness another feeling. They are, in a sense, the brain's attempt to say, I am you and you are me. Imagine watching someone lift a glass of water. Your mirror neurons, without effort, light up as though you were lifting it yourself. Now, picture someone wincing in pain. Your mirror neurons do the same, firing in the patterns of pain, even though your own body is uninjured. They do not know the difference between self and other. They only know the rhythm of experience. This perhaps is empathy at its most elemental, the reflection of another's soul within our own circuitry. But mirror neurons are more than just mimicry. They are the translators of emotion, the bridge between observation and compassion. When you see someone smile, your own brain begins to prepare the feeling of joy. When you hear someone cry, your brain rehearses sorrow. It is not performance. It is resonance, like a string vibrating because another string nearby has been struck. And here is where empathy revives us. Every act of resonance strengthens the bonds between these neurons, carving deeper pathways, making the brain more responsive to connection. In loneliness, these pathways wither, the mirror grows dim. But in empathy, they blaze anew, rekindling the circuitry that reminds us we belong to one another. Think of it. Your brain, at its core, is not designed for isolation. It is designed for reflection. Its health depends on the mirrors it holds. When you feel understood, when someone truly listens and resonates, your neurons settle into harmony. Cortisol fades, oxytocin rises, and the mirror gleams clear. When you give that resonance to another, your own brain benefits in turn. The act of reflection revives both mirrors at once, and yet there is something almost spiritual hidden here. For if the brain mirrors another's joy, another's sorrow, another's fear, then in those moments, the boundary between lives is blurred. You are not simply you. You are also the echo of the other. Empathy, through the humble mechanism of neurons, lets us step for a moment beyond the prison of the self, into a larger shared awareness. It is no wonder that cultures across the world, across history, have spoken of compassion as sacred. Long before science named mirror neurons, poets and mystics named them in other ways. The eye as a window to the soul, the heart as a vessel that can hold another's pain. Science shows us the mechanism, but the meaning remains timeless. Empathy revives not just the brain, but the very sense of what it means to be human. So the next time you catch yourself smiling back at a stranger or feeling the ache in another's silence, remember, this is not weakness. This is not accident. This is your brain's mirror, shimmering, alive, reminding you that you are part of something vast, something luminous, something that revives you even as it binds you to the souls around you. There are moments in life that feel almost electric, though no visible spark is seen. A room falls quiet as someone begins to speak from the heart. Two friends sit in silence, yet the silence hums with understanding. A crowd of strangers moves together, breathing together, bound by a rhythm they did not plan but instinctively share. This is the pulse of presence, the living current of empathy made tangible. When two people truly connect, their bodies begin to align in ways that science can now measure. Heartbeats find a rhythm together, synchronizing as though keeping time with the same hidden drum. Breathing patterns, once separate, fall into step. Even subtle movements, a nod, a shift in posture, the flicker of eyes, mirror one another. With uncanny precision, presence, it seems, is not passive. It is an exchange, a pulse passing between bodies, reviving both in its flow. In these moments, the brain behaves like an instrument tuned to another. The vagus nerve, which stretches like a river between the brain and the heart, responds to empathy by slowing the heart rate, calming the body. The parasympathetic system whispers, "You are safe here." Safety itself becomes contagious, spreading through proximity, through attention, through the invisible pulse of shared presence. And what happens when we immerse ourselves in this pulse? The brain begins to rewire. Regions tied to social cognition, the medial prefrontal cortex, the temporal partial junction, strengthen their pathways. Emotional regulation sharpens, resilience deepens, and the storms of stress lose their grip. Presence itself becomes a healer, not through words, but through alignment. But this is more than biology. It is poetry written in flesh. When you sit with someone who truly sees you, it feels as though time loosens. The restless mind slows, the clamor of thought softens, and the present moment blooms wider, richer, more alive. Empathy does not only revive the brain's chemistry, it revives the experience of being here, now, together. And perhaps this is why shared presence feels sacred, because in those moments, the illusion of separateness falls away. Your pulse is not only yours, it beats in rhythm with another's. Your breath is not only yours, it flows alongside theirs. The boundaries blur, not into chaos, but into harmony. It is as though two lives, for a moment, become one life with two bodies, two perspectives, two hearts beating together. This pulse is what makes us human, yet it is also what connects us to the greater web of life. Flocks of birds, schools of fish, herds that move as one, all pulse together, finding safety, finding rhythm in unity. We are not separate from this. We are a continuation of it. Our empathy is the human form of that ancient pulse, refined into presence, deepened into compassion. And here lies the revival. When life feels fractured, when the mind is scattered, when loneliness wraps tight. Around the heart, empathy restores the rhythm. It reminds the brain that its true nature is not isolation, but connection. It reminds the body that safety is found not in walls, but in shared pulses. It reminds the soul that presence, when shared, is enough to keep us alive in ways we often forget to name. Empathy does not thrive in walls or armor. It lives on a bridge, a fragile one, suspended between two hearts, woven from threads of vulnerability. To feel with another, you must be willing to open, to risk the trembling of your own soul. Without vulnerability, empathy is reduced to sympathy, distant, safe, observing. But with vulnerability, empathy becomes alive, trembling, powerful, enough to transform both lives it touches. Think of the moment when someone confesses their pain. Their voice quivers, their eyes fall, their silence carries a weight heavier than words. In that moment, they are stepping onto the bridge, offering their truth without knowing if it will be met with care or rejection. And when you lean forward, when you let their words stir something within you, you too step onto that bridge. For a moment, two lives balance together over the abyss of isolation, held only by trust. The brain feels this risk. Vulnerability ignites the amygdala, the guardian of fear, reminding you of the dangers of exposure. But empathy, if embraced, calms the guardian. The prefrontal cortex, the reasoning mind, reassures. Here, connection matters more than protection. And slowly, the body learns that vulnerability is not weakness, but the pathway to deeper strength. Oxytocin flows strongest when we are most vulnerable. A tear shed in front of another, a trembling confession, a wound laid bare. These are the moments when bonding chemicals surge, sealing trust not with perfection, but with openness. Empathy revives us precisely because it asks us to bring forth the raw, unpolished self, the self that feels, that breaks, that longs to be seen. And yet, there is danger too, for the bridge of vulnerability is delicate. Betrayal, dismissal, indifference, these can shatter it in an instant. When empathy is absent, the risk of opening becomes a wound of its own. The brain remembers, encoding mistrust, teaching the self to retreat, to armor, to isolate. This is why empathy is not just kindness, but necessity. Without it, the fragile bridge collapses, and each heart retreats to its own lonely shore. But when the bridge holds, when empathy meets vulnerability with care, revival happens. Neural pathways linked to safety and trust grow stronger. The mind learns that it is not alone in carrying its burdens. The soul learns that pain shared is pain halved, that joy shared is joy doubled. And the fragile bridge, once tentative, becomes a passageway walked more easily, more often, until empathy itself feels like home. The miracle of vulnerability is that it multiplies strength. By stepping into openness, we give permission for others to do the same. By showing our cracks, we allow light to move through. Empathy does not demand perfection. It asks only for presence. It asks only for the courage to step onto the bridge, to tremble, and to remain. And perhaps that is the revival we most need. For in a world that teaches us to hide, to harden, to protect, empathy whispers the opposite. Soften, open, trust. The fragile bridge is the only path across the abyss of isolation. And every time we walk it, we remind our brains, our bodies, and our souls that we were never meant to travel this life alone. Close your eyes and imagine the countless generations before you, the fires they sat around, the stories they told, the hands they held in grief and celebration. Before there were books, before there was language as we know it, empathy was the memory that preserved humanity. It was how feelings were passed down, how wisdom was carried, how survival itself became possible. The brain, in many ways, is not only an organ of thought, but a library of echoes. When you feel another's pain, you are not simply responding to the present. You are remembering, through your body, what it has always meant to be human. The anterior insula stirs, the limbic system flares, and in those sparks lies a continuity, older than words. Empathy is not new, it is ancestral. It is the memory carved into our neurons by millennia of shared struggle and shared joy. Anthropologists have found that communities who thrived through famine, war, and migration did so not because they were the strongest, but because they cared for one another. Fossil remains of humans who lived long after devastating injuries show that they were kept alive by groups who tended to them, fed them, carried them. Empathy, quite literally, became the difference between extinction and survival. The brain carries this truth forward, encoding connection as instinct, reviving in us the ancient memory that to belong is to live. And it goes deeper still. Empathy is how culture itself is preserved. When a story is told with trembling voice and another listens, the feelings carried in that story are absorbed and remembered. A mother's lullaby, a grandfather's tale of struggle, a stranger's poem that moves you to tears. These are more than words. They are feelings passed from one nervous system to another, so that the memory of what it means to live does not fade. Even now, in the digital age, when we read a message that comforts us, or hear a voice through headphones that makes us feel understood, the brain responds in the same way. Stress hormones decline, trust is built. The medium changes, but the memory remains. Empathy endures because it is wired into the architecture of being human. It revives us by reminding us of where we came from and who we are meant to be. And perhaps this is why, when empathy is absent, we feel a hollow ache, as though something ancient is missing. Loneliness is not just the absence of company. It is the absence of resonance. It is the brain searching for the memory of connection and finding only silence. The revival comes when we return to one another, when the memory of humanity is awakened in us through simple acts of presence, a glance, a touch, a moment of listening. The truth is simple yet profound. To feel with another is to remember. To remember is to revive. And every time empathy stirs within us, we are not only connecting with the person before us, we are connecting with the endless chain of humanity that came before, and the chain that will continue after. Empathy is the memory that binds the past, the present, and the future into one unbroken thread. Have you ever wondered why a child instinctively comforts a crying friend, or why even animals sometimes stand vigil over their wounded companions? Beneath the polished surface of our modern lives lies something far older, something written in the quiet script of evolution. Empathy is not just a lofty virtue we picked up in philosophy, or a moral code drilled into us by society. It is a survival tool, etched into the folds of our being by millions of years of trial and error. Think of our earliest ancestors, fragile, exposed to the jaws of predators, the bitter chill of unrelenting winters, and the gnawing hunger of scarcity. Alone, a single human was weak, vulnerable, and finite. But together they became something else, an organism greater than the sum of its parts. Fire could be tended, food could be shared, danger could be watched for while others slept. This togetherness demanded something more than instinct. It demanded a way to sense the needs, the pains, and the hopes of others without words. That is where empathy was born. Picture a small clan huddled in the mouth of a cave. One of them is injured, unable to hunt, unable to contribute. A purely selfish mind might say, leave them, survival of the fittest. But those who stayed, who nurtured, who recognized the pain of the wounded and acted upon it, they were the ones who carved the deeper legacy. Because the injured, when healed, could hunt again, defend again, and return the care when needed. Survival favored not the ruthless but the bonded, and so, the quiet force of empathy wove itself into the double helix of our kind. Even beyond humans, you can see the whisper of this inheritance. Elephants mourn their dead, stroking the bones of lost kin with gentle trunks. Dolphins support an injured pod member, keeping them afloat for hours, days, even when food is scarce. Wolves bring meat back for the weakest of their pack. This is no accident. It is a recognition, an ancient agreement between living beings that survival is not a solo act but a symphony. But empathy did more than keep our ancestors alive. It sharpened their minds. To predict what another might feel, to imagine their perspective, was to build the foundations of complex thought itself. Mirror neurons fired in the brain, rehearsing the experiences of others as if they were our own. This gave us foresight. It gave us culture. It gave us the ability to weave stories, to teach lessons, to pass down wisdom, not just through scars, but through language, art, and ritual. And so, empathy became the hidden architect of civilization. Villages, tribes, and eventually cities rose not on competition alone, but on cooperation, compassion, and shared identity. Every temple, every song, every circle around the fire was built from this seed. The recognition that we are not just individuals, but threads in one vast tapestry. Yet here lies the paradox. We carry in our brains both the echo of the beast and the resonance of the empath. We are torn between the hunger for self-preservation and the yearning for connection. Some moments, empathy feels like weakness in a world obsessed with dominance. But the truth, as whispered by evolution itself, is that it is the opposite. It is our strength, our strategy, our design. When you feel the shiver of another's sorrow, when you cry at a story that is not your own, when you reach out a hand instead of turning away, you are not merely being kind. You are carrying the torch of a survival mechanism that allowed our species to transcend extinction. You are honoring the unbroken chain of ancestors who felt as you feel now. Empathy is not soft, it is fierce, it is ancient, it is written into the marrow of who we are. And every time we choose it, every time we let it revive not just our brains but our bonds, we keep alive the quiet genius that has sustained humanity across the ages. Close your eyes for a moment and remember the last time someone you loved walked into a room, silent but carrying a storm behind their eyes. You didn't need them to speak. You knew. Something in the set of their shoulders, the rhythm of their breath, the weight in their silence spoke louder than any sentence could. This quiet recognition is empathy's hidden language, a vocabulary without letters, written not in words, but in pulses of feeling, tone, and gesture. Long before humanity painted symbols on cave walls or shaped syllables with their tongues, there was this form of communication, a shared breath, a mirrored expression, the instinctive resonance of two nervous systems reaching across the invisible space between them. Our brains are wired for it. Neurons fire not only when we act, but when we see another act. When we witness their smile, their wince, their trembling hand. We don't just observe, we inhabit. Watch a baby mimic the smile of their mother before they've ever spoken their first word. Notice how laughter spreads like wildfire in a crowd, or how grief can fall over a group like a darkened sky, contagious and unspoken. These are not coincidences. They are signals, echoes moving through the shared field of human experience. Empathy lives here, in the subtle transmissions we feel, but cannot quite explain. Think of it as a second language hidden beneath the first. Words are clumsy compared to it. Words can lie, but the quiver in a voice betrays truth. Words can hide, but the fleeting tension around the eyes reveals what is withheld. Empathy reads between the syllables, pulling meaning from silence itself. It is the mother tongue of the heart, and whether we acknowledge it or not, we speak it every day. Science calls it affective attunement, mirror resonance, emotional contagion, but those terms barely graze the poetry of it. What really happens is that two beings share a current, like tuning forks vibrating in harmony, their frequencies aligning. When your chest tightens as you watch someone hold back tears, when joy leaps in you at another's laughter, you are not imagining it. You are feeling the echo of their nervous system inside your own. This hidden language is what allows us to build trust. A leader who senses the fear of their people can calm them. A healer who feels the pulse of another's pain can guide them through recovery. A lover who recognizes longing in silence can answer without needing to be told. These unspoken exchanges are what keep relationships alive. They are the invisible threads that bind hearts together when words falter. But here's the mystery. The more we lean into this language, the sharper it becomes. Like any muscle, empathy strengthens with use. The more we allow ourselves to notice, the subtle sigh, the downward glance, the hesitation before a word, the more fluent we become. We start to move through the world as translators of the unseen, interpreters of the invisible, listeners of the silent symphony around us. And when we ignore it, when we numb ourselves, we lose the signal. We stop noticing. We let the hidden language fade beneath the noise of distraction. In those moments, the world feels colder, harsher, more disconnected. But the language never truly dies. It waits, patient in the marrow of our being, ready to be revived the moment we open ourselves to feel again. To sense without words is to remember something primal. It is to return to the deep well of connection that predates speech, predates society, predates even history. Empathy, in its hidden language, is the bridge between souls. And once you step onto that bridge, you realize you have never been and never will be truly alone. Imagine yourself in a wilderness lost among towering trees. The path forward is uncertain, shadows stretch long, and every sound feels like both a warning and a promise. Alone, your chances of survival shrink, but beside you stands another, eyes alert, ears tuned to signals you might miss, heart steady when yours falters. You lean on each other, instinctively reading fear, hope, exhaustion, and resolve without needing to speak. This is not just companionship, it is navigation. Empathy here becomes a survival map. From the dawn of humanity, empathy has been the compass guiding us through the uncharted. When predators lurked in the tall grasses, when storms threatened to sweep away fragile shelters, when hunger hollowed the bones of entire tribes, survival hinged not only on strength, but on awareness of one another. To feel the unease of the scout returning late, to sense the despair of a mother whose child had not eaten, to recognize the courage of a hunter ready to risk it all. These were signals as vital as the tracks of prey or the smell of rain on the wind. Empathy allowed us to act as one body, many hearts moving in unison toward survival. Even now, stripped of spears and firelit caves, empathy still maps our survival. In a crowded city, where millions of strangers move in tangled patterns, empathy helps us navigate. It softens sharpness. It tells us when to step aside, when to lend a hand, when to pause instead of pushing forward. It reminds us that behind every passing face, there is a life as fragile and vast as our own. And in recognizing that, we lessen the invisible dangers of isolation, despair, and loneliness, the modern predators that stalk the mind. Think of empathy as a cartographer drawing invisible maps between us. Each glance, each shared feeling, becomes a landmark. We learn where others hurt, where they flourish, where they need shelter. Over time, these maps create entire landscapes of trust. Families, communities, nations. Without them, the terrain of human connection collapses into wasteland. But with them, we find paths through uncertainty, trails through the thickest unknowns. There is also an inner survival at play. Empathy does not only help us endure threats from the outside world, it steadies us against storms within. When someone sees your pain and acknowledges it, even without solving it, a weight lifts. The map of empathy tells you, you are not lost, you are not unseen. That recognition alone can mean the difference between collapse and endurance. Perhaps this is why, in times of great upheaval, wars, disasters, pandemics, it is often the smallest acts of empathy that shine brightest. A stranger sharing food, a neighbor checking in, a hand extended in the dark. These gestures do not just ease the present moment, they redraw the survival map, reminding us that even in chaos, we are not wandering blind. And there's something profound in realizing this. Empathy does not erase the wilderness. It does not remove the danger, the hunger, the storm, but it gives us bearings. It teaches us where to step, how to move, and most importantly, how to keep moving together. It revives not only the brain's capacity for connection, but the spirit's will to endure. To walk through life without empathy is to walk without a map. Every road feels hostile, every shadow threatening. But with empathy alive in us, every step becomes part of a greater journey, a shared pilgrimage towards survival, belonging, and meaning. So the next time you sense another's burden and instinctively reach to lighten it, know this: you are holding a fragment of humanity's oldest map, a map not written on parchment or stone, but in the silent language of the heart. And with each act of empathy, you redraw it, guiding us all through the vast unknown. There is a silence more chilling than loneliness. It is the silence that falls. When empathy fades, when we stop hearing the cries of others, stop noticing the trembling hands, stop caring for the voices that call out softly in need. In that silence, something vital unravels. For as much as empathy revives and strengthens the brain, The absence of it starves us, both as individuals and as a species. Think of civilizations that rose to greatness, not only on power, but on shared bonds of care, only to collapse when those bonds were severed. When leaders stopped listening, when neighbors stopped protecting one another, when human lives became numbers, statistics, or burdens to be discarded. History whispers the same lesson again and again. Without empathy, even the mightiest structures crumble. On the individual level, the loss is no less profound. A person cut off from empathy drifts into isolation. Their world becomes smaller, colder, defined only by the self. Relationships turn transactional. The ability to trust erodes, because without empathy, there is no bridge to cross between hearts. And in the brain, studies reveal, the pathways that empathy once illuminated begin to dim. Neural circuits, meant to mirror and connect, fall quiet. The vibrant network that thrives on connection atrophies into stillness. But the cost does not stop at disconnection. It invites harm. A lack of empathy makes cruelty possible. Without the ability to feel another's suffering, there are no brakes on violence, exploitation, or neglect. It is why empathy is not just a kindness, it is a safeguard. A society that loses it risks falling into cycles of indifference and dehumanization. What begins as small acts of apathy, ignoring, dismissing, looking away, can snowball into something devastating. And yet, perhaps the deepest tragedy of losing empathy is not what we do to others, but what we do to ourselves. For when we shut ourselves off from another's emotions, we also close the door on joy that is shared, laughter that multiplies, healing that comes from mutual recognition. We lose access to one of the brain's greatest gifts, the ability to feel beyond our own boundaries. Life becomes narrower, stripped of the colors that connection paints across the canvas of experience. But there is a quiet warning hidden here too. Empathy is not indestructible. It can be dulled by constant distraction, numbed by overstimulation, corroded by cynicism. Each time we turn away from the subtle signals of others, each time we silence the tug in our chest, telling us to care, the thread weakens. Slowly, the map fades until the world begins to look like a place where everyone walks alone. The good news, however, is that empathy can be revived. Even in the most hardened hearts, even in the most fragmented societies, sparks remain. A single act of kindness can reignite it. A single moment of recognition can reawaken it. For empathy is not lost forever when it slips. It is merely waiting, patient, in the quiet corners of our brain, ready to flare again when given the chance. To lose. Empathy is to lose ourselves. To regain it is to return home. And in that return lies not only survival, but revival of the brain, the heart, and the fragile, enduring web that binds us all together. When you look into a mirror, you see your reflection, your face, your expression, the shell of who you are in that instant. But empathy is a deeper kind of mirror. It does not reflect the surface. It reflects the hidden soul. Through empathy, we see ourselves in others, and others in ourselves. We discover that the borders between me and you are far thinner than they appear. Think of the moment. You comfort a stranger who is weeping. Their sorrow stirs something inside you, not because you've lived their exact story, but because in their trembling, you recognize your own capacity for grief. You are reminded of your own fragility, your own longing to be held when life feels unbearable. In that moment, the divide dissolves. You are not separate beings, you are reflections, two ripples from the same ocean of humanity. This is why empathy revives the brain so powerfully. It forces us out of the narrow prison of self and places us into a hall of mirrors, where every encounter reveals another facet of our being. We grow not by gazing endlessly at our own reflection, but by recognizing ourselves refracted in the lives around us. The joy of a child laughing, the resilience of someone enduring loss, the courage of a friend taking a risk. All of these are mirrors reminding us of what we too carry within. Even across great distances, cultures, languages, generations, the mirror holds true. Read an ancient poem, and you feel the ache of a voice that lived centuries ago, and yet the sorrow sounds like your own. Watch a film from a culture utterly unlike yours, and tears spring to your eyes, unbidden, because the pain on screen touches something universal. Empathy breaks through time, geography, identity. It reminds us that the soul has only one shape, mirrored endlessly in countless lives. And in this recognition, something astonishing happens. The brain begins to soften its defenses. The boundaries between self and other blur, and in their place grows understanding. The prefrontal cortex lights up, weaving narratives of shared meaning. The insula hums with resonance, allowing us to physically feel what another feels. It is as if empathy polishes the mirror inside us, making it clearer, brighter, more accurate. But mirrors can also be uncomfortable. Sometimes empathy forces us to confront truths we would rather avoid. To see someone's suffering is to face the possibility of our own. To see someone's cruelty is to admit that the same seed could live in us. Empathy doesn't just reflect the beautiful, it reflects the whole. And in doing so, it asks us to accept that what we fear, what we despise, what we love, all belong to the shared human soul. This is the profound gift and challenge of empathy. It does not allow us to remain untouched, uninvolved, safely isolated. It insists that we are not only responsible for our own reflection, but also for the countless reflections we encounter in others. When we turn away, we dull the mirror. When we engage, we polish it. Each act of recognition clears the glass just a little more, until one day we may finally see not just fragments, but the full, dazzling unity of the soul reflected in all things. Empathy, then, is more than kindness. It is a mirror, and to look into it deeply is to realize there is no other. There is only us, mirrored again and again, each life a shard of the same radiant whole. Imagine sitting in a vast concert hall, the silence before the first note heavy with anticipation. Then, slowly, the instruments begin. Strings trembling, woodwinds sighing, percussion steady as a heartbeat. Alone, each sound is fragile, incomplete. But together, they weave a symphony that lifts the soul beyond what any single note could achieve. This is what happens in the brain when empathy awakens. It is not a single pathway flickering to life, but an orchestra of regions, each adding its own voice to the melody of connection. The amygdala feels the pulse of another's emotion, the thrum of fear, the shimmer of joy. The insula translates it into bodily sensation, letting us feel in our own flesh what another endures. The prefrontal cortex interprets, giving shape to perspective, weaving stories that make sense of another's inner world. The anterior cingulate bridges action to feeling, urging us not only to understand, but to respond. And as these regions converse, harmonize, and resonate, the brain becomes not an isolated chamber, but a hall filled with music. Every act of empathy is like striking a chord. Hear a baby cry, and your nervous system trembles in resonance. Witness a friend's laughter, and your own reward pathways ignite, showering the brain with warmth. These are not isolated responses. They are layered harmonics, rising and falling, in synchrony with the lives around us. The brain does not just observe empathy, it performs it, like a musician playing a part in a cosmic score. And when enough of us join this symphony, something greater emerges. Communities hum with connection, movements rise with courage, societies tilt toward justice, not because of laws alone, but because empathy compels the heart to act. Each note builds upon the other, until what began as a whisper becomes a chorus. Humanity, at its best, is empathy in concert, millions of brains resonating as one. But just as with any music, silence is a danger. A single instrument falling, quiet may go unnoticed, but if enough withdraw, the melody falters. Empathy, too, requires participation. It asks us to tune ourselves, to listen, to contribute our resonance to the whole. Without it, the brain grows silent, the world more discordant, the song of connection fades. Yet the beauty of this symphony is that it can always begin again. One act of kindness is enough to restart the rhythm. One moment of recognition can coax a hesitant instrument back into play. Empathy revives the brain not in grand gestures alone, but in these small, persistent notes, steady as a heartbeat, patient as a lullaby. So as you move through life, imagine yourself as both listener and musician. Hear the trembling notes of others. Add your own to the chorus. Let your brain not be a chamber of silence, but an instrument tuned to the great symphony of human connection. For in that music lies revival, not only of the brain, but of the spirit that binds us endlessly together. Deep inside the folds of the brain, hidden in the intricate wiring of neurons, lies the secret machinery that makes empathy possible. It isn't magic, though it feels like it. It isn't abstract philosophy, though it shapes our deepest morals. It is biology, a living architecture sculpted by evolution, designed not for isolation, but for resonance. When you see someone smile, your brain doesn't just observe, it mirrors. Tiny networks called mirror neurons fire as though you yourself are smiling, rehearsing the gesture within your own body. When someone winces in pain, those same circuits ignite, echoing the ache in your own chest. These neurons blur the boundary between self and other, writing empathy into the very core of perception. But it doesn't stop there. The insula, a small island of cortex hidden deep within the brain, pulses with every sensation of another's feeling. It translates their fear into your quickened heartbeat, their sorrow into your tightening throat. The anterior cingulate cortex, too, awakens, connecting emotion to action, urging you not only to sense, but to respond. These regions collaborate like instruments in an orchestra, ensuring that empathy is not just felt, but lived. Even the chemicals of the brain join in the performance. Oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone, flows when we connect, softening fear, building trust, drawing us closer. Dopamine rewards us when we give, lighting up the brain's pleasure centers with a warm glow. Serotonin steadies, reminding us that safety comes not only from self-protection, but from shared protection. Together, they weave a biochemical tapestry of connection, making empathy not only natural, but deeply rewarding. What's remarkable is how finely tuned this system is. A glance, a sigh, the tremor of a voice, all are enough to spark cascades of neural activity. Our brains are exquisitely sensitive instruments, tuned to detect and replicate the emotions of others. Without this sensitivity, language would falter, relationships would collapse, and societies would crumble. With it, we become something more than individuals. We become networks of awareness, reflections folded endlessly into one another. And yet, empathy is not automatic. Like any skill, it can be strengthened or weakened. Chronic stress, constant distraction, and numbing isolation can dampen the signals, leaving the circuits quiet, the chemicals depleted. But with presence, practice, and intention, empathy revives. Neural pathways strengthen, connections sharpen, and the orchestra of the brain plays louder, clearer, more beautifully. In this sense, empathy is not only biology, it is choice. A choice to attend, to listen, to allow the signals of another's soul to reach our own. And when we choose it, when we let the brain's biology perform its timeless song, we awaken something far greater than survival. We awaken the possibility of a world where connection is not the exception, but the rule. So the next time you feel another's joy leap unexpectedly into your own chest, or tears spring to your eyes at a story that is not yours, remember this: your brain is not betraying you. It is fulfilling its deepest design. It is reviving itself, note by note, neuron by neuron, through the ancient and ever-living language of empathy. There are moments in life when your body betrays you, in the gentlest of ways. You see someone stub their toe, and suddenly you wince, clutching your own foot as if the pain has leapt across the air. You watch an athlete land hard on their knee and an ache pulses through your own. Or you witness a stranger laugh, their joy bubbling over, and before you realize it, Your mouth is curling upward too, echoing their delight. This strange mimicry is not imagination. It is the echo of mirror neurons, one of the brain's most mysterious gifts. Discovered in the 1990s almost by accident, mirror neurons reside in the premotor cortex and the parietal lobe, flickering to life not only when we act, but when we see someone else act. When you grasp a cup, certain neurons fire, but watch someone else reach for a cup, and those very same neurons spark in your brain as though you were reaching too. The body rehearses another's movement, another's feeling, without ever lifting a finger. What this means is profound. At the level of neurons, there is no strict boundary between self and other. Your brain, in a very real sense, does not fully distinguish your experience from theirs. To see is to simulate, to observe is to inhabit. This is why empathy feels less like a choice and more like a current sweeping us away. We are wired to echo, and the echoes are not limited to actions. They extend into emotions. Watch someone's face twist in sadness, and mirror neurons help your own body rehearse that sadness, pulling at the corners of your mouth, tightening your chest, summoning a heaviness in your gut. It is as though empathy is rehearsed in the theatre of the body before it even reaches the theatre of the mind. Yet this echo, while automatic, is not uniform. We echo more strongly those we know, those we like, those we feel kinship with. A loved one's pain reverberates louder in us than a stranger's. A face that looks familiar sparks more resonance than one we do not recognize. Evolution designed us this way, not to be cold, but to conserve energy, to prioritize connection with our tribe. And yet this is also empathy's greatest challenge. For to expand beyond our small circles, to feel for the stranger, to resonate with the unfamiliar, that is where empathy must grow conscious, intentional, practiced. Still, the power of mirror neurons lies in their invitation. They remind us that the line between your body and mine is thinner than we imagine. That joy, sorrow, pain, laughter, none of these belong solely to the individual. They ripple, they echo, they cross boundaries invisibly. Every time you find yourself flinching at someone else's pain or smiling at their joy, you are participating in a quiet neural symphony that links all of us, moment to moment. And here's the deeper wonder. The more we practice empathy, the stronger the echo grows. Mirror neurons adapt, sharpen, fine-tune. The more you allow yourself to feel with others, the more fluent your brain becomes in this ancient language of reflection. Like a chamber that grows more resonant the more it is used, empathy deepens with each act, each recognition, each echo honored. So the next time you laugh at a stranger's joy or feel your chest tighten at another's tears, remember, you are not broken, you are not weak. You are simply tuned, like an instrument, to the frequencies of life around you. This is not accident, it is design. Your neurons are mirrors, and through them, we glimpse the most essential truth, that we are reflections of one another, endlessly, beautifully, alive. Have you ever wondered why your throat tightens when someone else cries, or why your heartbeat quickens when you sit beside a friend drowning in fear? Empathy is not just a thought, it is a wave that sweeps through your entire biology, changing how your body breathes, pulses, and feels in the presence of another. At its core, empathy begins as sensation. Signals travel from the senses, eyes, ears, touch, and are carried deep into the brain's emotional centers. The amygdala, vigilant and ancient, notes the flicker of another's distress. The anterior cingulate cortex, like a tuning fork, vibrates with the emotional resonance of pain. And then the insula, often called the seat of self-awareness, lights up, registering that what we witness belongs not only to them, but somehow, in a borrowed way, to us. But empathy does not stay locked in the head. It floods outward, weaving itself into the body. The vagus nerve, a long and winding highway stretching from the brainstem through the chest and down into the belly, carries this resonance into our breath, our stomach, our very heart. A loved one's sorrow can slow our heartbeat, deepen our breath, soften the muscles around our eyes. Their joy, on the other hand, might quicken our pulse, warm our skin, and send our lips upward in an effortless smile. This embodied resonance is why empathy can feel exhausting at times. It is not mere imagination, it is a physiological event. When you hold the hand of someone in grief, your cortisol levels can rise as if you yourself were bearing their weight. When you share in another's relief, oxytocin, the hormone of connection, floods your bloodstream, knitting a chemical bond between you and them. Empathy is chemistry as much as it is poetry. And yet, what is most fascinating is how empathy transforms not only emotions but decisions. The prefrontal cortex, the brain's seat of reflection, receives these emotional currents and weighs them in its quiet scales. To feel another's pain is to consider action, to comfort, to help, to respond. Biology becomes behavior, chemistry becomes care. This is how empathy has carried humanity forward, not simply by making us feel, but by making us act. But here lies a paradox. The same biology that makes empathy powerful also makes it fragile. Flooded too often with pain, the body grows numb, the circuits dull, the heart withdraws. This is compassion fatigue, the cost of unshielded resonance. Yet biology also offers the remedy. Practices like deep breathing, mindfulness, and self-compassion strengthen the vagus nerve, restoring balance, making space for empathy to flow without drowning us. When we understand empathy as biology, its beauty only deepens. It is not a lofty ideal, not a virtue carved out by culture alone. It is breath, pulse, chemistry, rhythm. To be human is to be porous, to be influenced, to be changed by the presence of another. And in that porousness lies a quiet miracle. We are not alone, not even in the silence of our own bodies. Every tear, every laugh, every heartbeat we share carries proof that empathy is not just a feeling. It is a bridge of flesh and blood, a living pathway between us. Imagine sitting across from someone whose face crumples with sorrow. You don't need to ask what they are feeling. You already know. The ache tugs at your chest. Your eyes soften, and for a moment, their suffering becomes your own. This seamless transfer is not magic. It is the work of mirror neurons, those tiny messengers of empathy that fire in quiet synchrony across the brain. Discovered in the 1990s, mirror neurons live primarily in the premotor cortex and inferior parietal lobe. What they do is deceptively simple. When you watch someone else perform an action, your neurons fire as if you were performing that action yourself. But this mimicry extends beyond movement into emotion. Watch a smile, and your brain rehearses the joy behind it. Witness pain, and your neural circuits hum with the echoes of hurt. It is as if the brain cannot help but simulate the inner world of others. These simulations are not mere copies. They are living rehearsals, blending observation with embodiment. When you see a dancer leap, your motor cortex stirs with the memory of flight. When you see a hand wounded, your pain circuits flare as though the cut were yours. Mirror neurons blur the line between seeing and being, between witness and participant. This is why humans are natural storytellers. When you listen to a tale of heartbreak or triumph, your brain does not sit idle, it joins in. Heart rates rise during suspense, dopamine drips with resolution, and tears gather not because the story is yours, but because your mirror neurons have made it so. In empathy, the brain does not stand apart. It enters, participates, and feels. Yet there is more. Mirror neurons also act as teachers. They allow us to learn by watching, to grow without always doing. A child who sees kindness enacted understands its shape before practicing it themselves. A society that models cruelty spreads its shadows neuron to neuron, mirror to mirror. In this way, empathy is contagious, for better or worse. But there is a catch. Mirror neurons do not always distinguish self from other. Too much resonance, and we risk collapse, burdened by feelings not our own. This is why the prefrontal cortex, the seat of awareness, steps in to regulate. It reminds us, this pain belongs to them, not to you. You may feel it, but you need not drown in it. Balance is the key. Connection without erasure. Resonance without disappearance. In every glance, every gesture, mirror neurons are at work, weaving unseen threads between us. They are proof that the brain is not an isolated organ, but a social one, designed not to observe the world from behind glass, but to enter it, inhabit it, and be changed by it. To live without empathy would be to silence these mirrors, to darken the glass. To live with empathy is to let the brain fulfill its most human function, to reflect and to respond endlessly in the faces of others. Beneath every word of comfort, beneath every glance of understanding, there flows an invisible current, the chemistry of empathy. Our brains, elegant and restless, do not rely on neurons alone to weave connection. They summon the subtle power of hormones, those liquid messengers that bathe our thoughts, color our moods, and transform the abstract act of caring into something we feel in every fiber of the body. One of the most celebrated is oxytocin, often nicknamed the bonding hormone. It surges when we hold hands, when we share secrets, when we embrace. Mothers release it when nursing, lovers when touching. friends when laughing together. It is the quiet glue of trust, softening fear, inviting openness, whispering to us, "You are safe here, with them." But oxytocin is not just tenderness. It also sharpens the boundary of who belongs. It makes us fiercely protective of those we connect with, showing that empathy's chemistry carries both warmth and defense. Then there is dopamine, the brain's spark of reward. Acts of kindness light up its circuits like stars, making generosity feel not only right, but pleasurable. To give is to receive a glow within the brain's reward pathways, reinforcing connection through joy. Evolution has wired us so that helping others feels good, a neurological reminder that survival is collective, not solitary. Serotonin adds its steady hand, regulating mood, weaving stability into social bonds. Without it, empathy falters into irritability or despair. With it, patience blossoms, allowing us to sit with another's suffering without running, to hold space without losing balance. And then there is cortisol, the stress hormone, which reminds us that empathy carries weight. Witnessing another's pain can raise cortisol in our own bodies, mimicking the stress of the one we observe. It is a double-edged blade. It deepens compassion, but when chronic, can burn us out. This is why the chemistry of empathy demands balance. Too much stress and the circuits collapse. Too little connection, and the chemistry dries into numbness. All these hormones mingle, rising and falling like tides with every interaction. A conversation may lower blood pressure. A hug may stabilize heart rhythms. A shared laugh may flood the body with dopamine at once. These are not metaphors. They are measurable, tangible shifts in chemistry, proving that empathy is not only felt in the mind, but etched in the bloodstream. To understand this is to realize something profound. Empathy is not a soft idea. It is a physical force, as real as gravity. It shapes how our hearts beat, how our blood flows, how our very cells function. It is nature's way of binding one nervous system to another, so that survival is not the triumph of one, but the flourishing of many. The next time you feel warmth swell in your chest after giving kindness, remember that it is not only spirit, it is oxytocin and dopamine weaving their quiet spells. The next time you sit with a grieving friend, notice the heaviness in your body. It is cortisol echoing their storm. This is empathy's alchemy, the body becoming a vessel for another's story, chemistry rewriting the very script of the self. If you could place your ear against the brain during a moment of empathy, you would not hear silence, you would hear music. Not the music of instruments, but the hum and rhythm of networks, circuits, and chemicals singing together. Empathy is not confined to a single region. It is a symphony, a choir of voices scattered across the mind, rising and falling in a harmony that allows one human being to feel the truth of another. At the heart of this orchestra lies the anterior cingulate cortex, which resonates with the emotional tones of pain. Like a violin, its strings vibrate with the sorrow of others, creating resonance that ripples through the rest of the mind. Close by, the insula joins in, a deep drum carrying the beat of bodily awareness. It translates feelings into sensations, ensuring that empathy is not just a mental note, but a physical chord felt in the chest, the throat, the skin. Then the mirror neuron system contributes. Like flutes repeating the melody, it imitates, reflects, echoes, making the smile of another light up your own lips, the sigh of exhaustion weigh down your shoulders. The prefrontal cortex, wise and deliberate, acts as conductor, keeping balance, ensuring that empathy does not dissolve into overwhelm, but moves instead toward understanding and action. Even the brain's ancient structures lend their voices. The amygdala listens for fear and signals caution, reminding us that empathy is not blind. The hippocampus folds memory into the mix, recalling times when we too felt sorrow or joy, and allowing us to bridge past to present. And above all, the neurochemical currents, oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, flow like the brass section, swelling with warmth and color, carrying the music into the bloodstream itself. What makes this symphony remarkable is its precision. When one instrument falters, the whole song changes. In those with damaged insulas, empathy weakens, as if the drum has gone quiet. In those burdened by stress, cortisol drowns the harmony, muffling the subtler notes of care. But when the orchestra is tuned through presence, rest, compassion, the music of empathy is breathtaking, a full-bodied resonance that unites mind, body, and soul And here lies the miracle. This neural symphony is not played in isolation. It is responsive. It shifts, bends, and adapts to every interaction. Sit with someone joyful, and the orchestra plays bright and fast. Sit with someone grieving, and it slows into a low, solemn hymn. In empathy, the brain is not a solitary musician. It is part of an ensemble, adjusting its melody to fit the duet, the trio, the community. Perhaps this is why empathy feels holy at times. It is not just biology. It is not just neurons firing or chemicals flowing. It is the experience of two symphonies intertwining, blending notes across the invisible bridge between nervous systems. It is the recognition that we are instruments not meant to play alone, but to resonate with others in songs that neither of us could compose alone. And when the music of empathy plays, something awakens. Brains heal, hearts soften, isolation dissolves. For in the end, empathy is not simply the brain's music, it is humanity's. The brain is not a stone, it is clay. It bends, shifts, and rewires in response to the lives we live. This flexibility, called neuroplasticity, is the secret behind learning, memory, and recovery. But what often goes unnoticed is how empathy too sculpts the brain. Every act of listening, every moment of shared sorrow or joy leaves impressions on the neural canvas, reshaping who we are. Consider the repeated act of compassion. When you choose to pause, to notice the tremor in someone's voice, to hold their story gently, your brain is not passive. Pathways in the prefrontal cortex strengthen, making it easier the next time to slow down, to respond with care instead of judgment. The anterior cingulate cortex becomes more sensitive, tuning your awareness to the nuances of others' emotions. Like a muscle, empathy grows with use, weaving denser networks where once there were faint threads. Neuroimaging studies reveal this vividly. Long-term practitioners of loving-kindness meditation and intentional practice of directing compassion towards self and others show increased thickness in brain regions linked to empathy and emotion regulation. Their brains, sculpted by repeated acts of empathy, physically differ from those of people who rarely engage in such practices. This is not metaphor, it is anatomy, proof that what we feel and practice changes the architecture of the mind. But plasticity works in both directions. Chronic indifference, repeated dismissal of others' emotions, or constant immersion in hostility can weaken empathy's circuits. Neural pathways, like trails through a forest, fade when unused. Over time, the brain can become less responsive, less open, less capable of resonance. In this way, empathy is not guaranteed. It is cultivated, protected, and grown, or it dwindles into silence. What is striking is how small choices compound. A single act of noticing may seem minor, a smile returned, a silence respected, but each moment of empathy adds a stroke to the brain's mural. Over years, these strokes form a landscape, shaping not only how we see others, but how we see ourselves. The person who consistently chooses empathy builds a mind attuned to connection, while the one who turns away builds a mind attuned to isolation. This plastic gift reveals something profound. Empathy is not fixed at birth. It is not the inheritance of a lucky few. It is a living, growing skill, wired and rewired every day by our choices. To practice empathy is to carve new pathways of perception. To neglect it is to let those pathways vanish into undergrowth. And so, in every interaction, we stand at a crossroads. Will we allow the brain's clay to harden in shapes of indifference, or will we soften it with warmth, remolding ourselves into beings more open, more connected, more alive? The science of neuroplasticity whispers that it is never too late. Empathy can be revived, even in tired or hardened brains, if only we choose to practice it again. The brain is clay. Empathy is the sculptor. Together, they create the possibility of a mind that heals not only itself, but the world around it. Every encounter we have with another person leaves behind a trace, not just in their memory, but in ours, etched into the folds of the brain like footprints in sand. Empathy is not fleeting, it lingers. It leaves behind imprints that shape how we think, how we feel, and how we respond when the future echoes the past. At the center of this process lies the hippocampus, the keeper of memory. When you share in someone's grief, when you bask in their joy, the hippocampus encodes not only the details of the event, but the emotional resonance that accompanied it. Later, when something familiar stirs in your life, the memory reawakens, not just as an image, but as a feeling. In this way, empathy becomes part of your personal history, woven into the emotional archive of the self. This is why empathy deepens over time. A parent who once struggled in loneliness feels their child's teenage isolation with particular clarity. A person who has healed from loss feels the wound of another's mourning with sharper tenderness. Empathy draws from memory, mapping our own experiences onto the present, allowing us to recognize in others the reflections of our past. But empathy also shapes memory in reverse. When someone extends understanding to us, when a teacher notices our quiet struggle, when a friend sits silently beside us in sorrow, that moment lodges deeply in memory. The hippocampus holds it, and over time, it becomes a guiding light. We recall not only the pain, but the presence of care, and those recollections inspire us to offer the same. The memory of being understood becomes the seed of our own future empathy. The amygdala, too, participates in this imprinting. It attaches emotional weight to memories, amplifying those moments when empathy, or the lack of it, was most powerful. The sting of being dismissed, the ache of being unseen, the warmth of being fully acknowledged, all are marked with emotional tags, shaping how readily we will risk vulnerability again. Memory and empathy are inseparable, feeding one another in a cycle that builds the architecture of our relationships. What makes this process beautiful is its ripple effect. Empathy received in childhood often echoes into adulthood, carried forward unconsciously in gestures, habits, and instincts. A kind word from decades ago may still soften the way we listen today. Conversely, the absence of empathy may echo as silence in our own behaviors, until we learn to rewrite that memory by offering what we ourselves did not receive. To understand this is to see empathy not as a momentary spark, but as a force of continuity. It stitches the present to the past, carrying forward impressions that sculpt identity itself. Every shared tear, every shared laugh, every time someone chose to stay rather than walk away, these are not lost. They live in the hippocampus, in the amygdala, in the neural patterns that become who we are. Empathy is memory, and memory is empathy. Each one calls to the other, reminding us that no feeling, once shared, is ever truly gone. It lingers in us, shaping our brains, guiding our futures, and proving that connection is never wasted. It is stored, preserved, and carried onward, ready to awaken again. When you see someone stub their toe, why do you wince as if the pain were yours? When a stranger yawns, why does your body betray you with its own yawn? And when a loved one sobs, why does your own chest tighten until breathing feels heavy? These are not coincidences, they are echoes. They are the body's way of participating in empathy, translating another's emotions into sensations carved directly into your flesh. The nervous system acts as the stage for this echo. Signals from the eyes and ears, expressions, voices, movements flood into the brain and cascade outward through the autonomic nervous system. Heart rates adjust, muscles contract, breathing shifts. Your physiology bends in response to what you witness, as though your body insists on joining the experience, not as an observer but as a participant. The vagus nerve, winding like a river from brainstem to heart to gut, is empathy's secret messenger. When you sit with someone in despair, your vagus nerve carries the sorrow into your chest, slowing your heartbeat, dampening your breath. When you encounter joy, it releases, expanding the chest, softening the face, letting your body smile before your mind has even noticed. This is why empathy feels physical, because it is. The body mirrors emotion just as much as the brain mirrors expression. Science calls this embodied simulation, the brain's attempt to create a model of what the other is feeling, not through thought but through sensation. If someone trembles in fear, your own muscles may tense. If they laugh with abandon, your abdomen may contract in sympathetic rhythm. The echo is not perfect, but it is enough to let you taste the other's reality. Even hormones join this translation. Cortisol rises when you witness pain, echoing the stress of another. When you hold a grieving hand, easing tension and binding you closer. Adrenaline can even spike when you see someone else in danger, preparing your own body as if the threat were aimed at you. Empathy is not just felt, it is lived on the stage of your biology, but here lies both wonder and cost. To echo another too fully is to risk exhaustion. The body, confused by borrowed emotions, may carry stress that was never its own. This is why nurses, caregivers, and empaths often suffer fatigue. Their bodies have become echo chambers for the pain of others. Yet the same echo, when balanced, becomes medicine. To breathe with someone in panic can calm them. To smile with someone in despair can lift them. Your body becomes not only a mirror, but a balm. In truth, empathy makes us porous beings. We are not sealed containers, separate and untouched. We leak into one another, through neurons, through hormones, through breath and pulse. Our bodies do not merely witness life, they participate in it, absorbing fragments of others until we are mosaics of shared experience. So the next time you shiver at someone else's grief or laugh uncontrollably at someone else's joy, remember, this is not weakness. It is the body's echo, proof that we are designed not to stand apart, but to resonate, to feel, to be moved. Empathy does not ask us to think alone. It asks us to embody connection, to carry in our bones the truth that none of us lives untouched by the lives around us. Sit across from someone you love. Do nothing, no words, no gestures, just sit. Slowly, something remarkable happens. Your heartbeats begin to align. Your breathing falls into rhythm. Your bodies, once separate, begin to hum together in a quiet synchronicity. This is empathy at its most mysterious. Not just thoughts shared, not just feelings mirrored, but bodies entering into the same rhythm, as though guided by an invisible conductor. This phenomenon is called physiological synchrony. Scientists studying pairs of people, friends, lovers, even strangers, have found that when empathy flows, so do their bodies. Heart rates adjust to match, skin conductance rises and falls in tandem, and breathing begins to weave into one pattern. It is as if the nervous systems of two people decide to perform a duet, a subtle choreography written in pulses and breaths. The mechanism behind this synchrony lies partly in the vagus nerve and partly in shared attention. When you listen deeply to someone, when your gaze softens, when your focus narrows, the body naturally calibrates to their signals. Their sigh slows your own breathing. Their tension tightens your chest. Their relief softens your shoulders. Through micro-expressions and subtle shifts, the body learns and adjusts, falling into step with the other's inner rhythm. This synchrony is not just poetic, it has measurable effects. Couples whose heart rates align during conflict resolution are more likely to reconcile. Parents and infants who synchronize breathing during moments of care build stronger bonds of trust. Even strangers, when synchronized, report greater feelings of connection and cooperation. Empathy is not only emotional resonance, it is physiological unison. But synchronization carries another layer. It heals. When your nervous system falls into rhythm with someone calm, your own stress diminishes. Their steadiness regulates you, pulling you from chaos into balance. This is why sitting beside someone grounded can soothe anxiety, why holding hands can steady panic. Through empathy, one body becomes a lighthouse for another, guiding it back to shore. Yet synchrony is fragile. In a world of distractions, when attention splinters and presence fades, the rhythm breaks. The heartbeat stutters out of sync, the breathing drifts apart. Without empathy, the duet dissolves back into solos, each body alone in its own tempo. But when it is nurtured, when we give full presence, when we listen without rushing, the rhythm returns. And in those moments, empathy proves itself not only as a mental bond, but as a physical communion. Our bodies remember what our minds sometimes forget, that we are not designed to beat alone. Think of sitting beside a friend in sorrow. No advice is offered, no clever phrases spill into the air, only stillness. And yet, in that quiet companionship, something profound is communicated. I am here. I feel with you. You are not alone. Empathy, in silence, becomes less about saying and more about being. The brain, too, recognizes this. Silence between people who trust each other does not trigger discomfort. It triggers alignment. The nervous system interprets the pause not as absence, but as attunement. Heartbeats sync, breaths soften. In this way, silence itself becomes a language of co-regulation, soothing jagged neural rhythms without needing to disturb them with words. Cultures across the world understand this truth. In Japanese tradition, the word ma refers to the meaningful space between sounds, gestures, or moments, the silence that gives everything else weight. In certain indigenous practices, silence is considered a sacred act, a vessel for listening so deep it borders on prayer. Monks in stone monasteries, lovers lying awake in darkness, mourners gathering under heavy skies, all know that silence can cradle what language cannot. Why does silence carry empathy so well? Because it demands presence. Words can distract, can cover, can spin illusions. Silence strips us bare. To sit in silence with another requires vulnerability, a willingness to face the rawness of shared humanity. The absence of speech magnifies subtle signals. The warmth of a glance, the slowing of a breath, the soft tremor of a hand reaching out. Silence sharpens empathy's sensitivity until even the smallest gesture rings like a bell. And silence heals. In moments of trauma, when words stumble or fail, silence can hold the wound without reopening it. A parent stroking a child's back as both remain quiet. A partner holding a hand in a hospital room. A friend leaning close during heartbreak. These are not voids of sound, but sanctuaries of presence. The brain, flooded with signals of safety, begins to reorganize, to calm, to restore itself. Perhaps silence is empathy in its most faithful form because it refuses to intrude. It does not try to fix or explain. It does not compete for attention. It simply witnesses, and in being witnessed without condition, the heart finds the strength to continue. So, when language runs dry and explanations fall short, do not fear silence. Let it expand. Let it cradle both you and the other. For in that stillness, empathy whispers most clearly, "I am with you, and I understand," without needing to speak. Beneath the graphs, beneath the brain scans, beneath the carefully measured spikes of oxytocin and synchronized heartbeats, there is a layer of empathy that resists capture. It moves in places microscopes cannot see, in patterns data cannot pin down, and yet we feel it profoundly, undeniably. Science maps empathy as circuitry, mirror neurons firing, limbic systems resonating, prefrontal cortices decoding the emotions of another. These discoveries are beautiful, illuminating the machinery of compassion, but they are not the whole picture. For every image on an fMRI screen, there remains an invisible tide, the ineffable knowing that arises when you look into someone's eyes and feel their soul ripple inside you. Call it intuition, call it resonance, call it spirit. Words falter, but the experience endures. Empathy often arrives not as logic, but as sudden certainty. I know what you feel, though I cannot prove how. It is the quiet gasp when you sense a loved one's sadness before they speak. The shiver when you know someone is thinking of you. The warmth that enters without explanation when kindness is shared. Perhaps this hidden current flows because we are not merely isolated minds inside skulls, but living beings woven into one vast fabric. Our nervous systems are strands in a larger net of awareness, tugging on each other across silence, across distance, across time. Empathy may be the way this fabric reminds us of its unity. One body, many voices. Cultures have long spoken of this unseen thread. Ancient mystics described it as a luminous web binding all creatures. Philosophers spoke of the sympathy of souls, poets of invisible strings connecting hearts. Modern physics hints at entanglement, at unseen connections that defy distance. Whether metaphor or mystery, the truth remains. Empathy seems to move in ways we cannot reduce to equations, and perhaps it is meant to remain partly hidden. For empathy is not just knowledge, it is wonder. To believe we can entirely capture it risks flattening what makes it sacred. Its power lies in its mystery, in the way it slips past definition to touch the deepest chambers of our being. So when science ends its measurements, when words end their reach, empathy continues, in the hush of a shared glance, in the tear shed for a stranger, in the sudden relief of being understood without explanation. These are the currents that revive us, the invisible rivers flowing beneath thought and speech, binding us to one another in ways too vast for any single discipline to hold. The brain glows when empathy moves through it, yes, but beyond the glow, something greater hums, and it whispers, "You are not alone, because you are part of me, and I am part of you." Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the brain as a vast city at night. Billions of lights flicker on and off, forming constellations of thought, memory, and sensation. Within this living city, certain pathways stretch like bridges between islands. Pathways built not for survival alone, but for understanding, for resonance, for empathy. When you feel another's joy or flinch at another's pain, this is not random magic. It is the choreography of brain regions speaking in harmony. The anterior insula lights up, offering awareness of your own bodily state while mirroring the states of others. The anterior cingulate cortex pulses, drawing your attention to another's distress as though it were a beacon. the medial prefrontal cortex steps in, weaving perspective-taking into narrative, allowing you to imagine what it is like to walk in their shoes. These regions, and many more, form empathy's neural architecture. Yet what makes this architecture extraordinary is not its individual structures, but the way they connect. The brain does not run empathy like a machine executing a script. It performs it like an orchestra, where each section listens and adjusts to the others. Emotional resonance from the limbic system blends with higher reasoning from the frontal lobes, while sensory regions layer in detail from touch, sight, and sound. The result is not just perception, but a lived experience of another's world. Think of mirror neurons, those remarkable cells that fire not only when you act, but when you witness someone else act. When you see another person reach for a glass of water, your motor circuits quietly echo the movement. When you see them stumble, your own body contracts in sympathy. Mirror neurons remind us that empathy begins in the body, long before words step in. But empathy is not just mimicry. If it were, we would drown in the emotions of others. Instead, the prefrontal cortex regulates, interprets, balances, ensuring that empathy is both felt and understood. It allows you to cry with a grieving friend without collapsing entirely, to cheer for another's success without losing yourself in envy. It gives empathy both weight and boundaries. Even more astonishing, this architecture is plastic. It changes with use. The more you practice compassion, the more robust these neural bridges become. Meditation on loving kindness thickens the anterior cingulate. Acts of service strengthen pathways between emotional and regulatory regions. In short, empathy rewires the city of the brain, carving new streets where once there were none. And so, empathy is not just a trait you have or lack, it is a skill, a practice, a living architecture built across time. With every shared glance, every act of kindness, every effort to imagine another's world, the brain refines its structures. The city glows brighter, more connected, more alive. This is how empathy revives us, by shaping the very architecture of the mind into something more open, more resilient, more beautifully human. Deep within the folds of the brain, tucked between ridges of grey matter like a hidden shoreline, lies the insula. It does not shout like the amygdala, nor does it strategize like the prefrontal cortex. Instead, it whispers, quietly translating the language of the body into the poetry of emotion. And in this whisper, empathy takes its first breath. The insula is a cartographer of sensation. It tracks the flutter in your chest when you're anxious, the warmth that spreads when you're comforted, the knot that forms in your stomach when you witness someone in pain. It is the bridge between heartbeat and awareness, between breath and meaning. Without it, the body would remain mute, its signals adrift. With it, the body speaks, and the mind listens. But the insula does more than report your own states. When you watch another person grimace, when you hear the tremor in their voice, your insula flares as though the pain belongs to you. It blurs the boundary between self and other, letting you feel their body through the echo of your own. This is the seed of empathy, to know another not through abstract reasoning, but through visceral resonance. Consider what happens when you see a child scrape a knee. Your stomach clenches, your chest tightens. The insula does not wait for you to decide to care. It thrusts you into shared sensation. It tells you, wordlessly, this is what they feel. And from this embodied echo arises compassion, the desire to comfort, to reach out. Yet the insula's whisper is not limited to pain. It stirs when joy radiates from another, when laughter ripples through a room, when awe spreads like light. Empathy revives the brain, yes, but it also revives the heart. It teaches it to listen, to synchronize, to join in the subtle music of another's existence. And in that joining, we glimpse a truth larger than biology, that to be alive is not to be separate, but to share in the same rhythm, heart to heart, breath to breath. Imagine a hand placed gently on your shoulder. No words spoken, no explanation offered. Yet in that simple act, something profound happens. The storm inside you quiets. Anxiety loosens its grip. Loneliness lifts, if only slightly. Touch, when wrapped in empathy, becomes a language more ancient than speech, a transmission of safety and recognition written directly into the skin. The skin, vast and sensitive, is our largest organ of connection. Beneath its surface lie countless receptors, tuned not only to pain and pressure, but also to a particular kind of caress. The slow, gentle stroke associated with comfort. These receptors, known as C-tactile afferents, sends signals to brain regions tied to emotional meaning rather than raw sensation. A stranger's accidental brush might register as nothing or even discomfort. But the same touch, when imbued with intention and empathy, carries the weight of belonging. Scientists studying this field call it affective touch, and it changes the brain. When someone touches us with care, oxytocin levels rise, dampening fear responses. Cortisol, the stress hormone, declines. The amygdala calms, while the insula, responsible for awareness of the body's internal state, lights up, strengthening the sense of being held, not just physically, but emotionally. Empathy, carried through touch, becomes a form of regulation, aligning two nervous systems in quiet harmony. Consider infants. Before they can form words, before they can even hold a gaze, they know touch. A mother's hand resting lightly on the chest, a father's steady arms, a sibling's playful hug. These gestures teach the child's nervous system what safety feels like. Long before language, empathy is transmitted through warmth and pressure, through skin against skin. Touch is the first dictionary of love. Yet touch is not always healing. When stripped of empathy, when it is mechanical, rushed, or cold, it can feel hollow or even invasive. The nervous system, keenly attuned to intent, knows the difference. Empathy is the soul inside the gesture. Without it, touch is just contact, an empty press of skin. But when empathy guides it, touch becomes transformative. A hand held through grief says what words cannot. A shoulder squeeze before a challenge steadies hidden fears. A forehead kissed in silence writes entire novels of reassurance. These moments remind us that empathy is not confined to thought or voice. It moves through the body, carried by warmth and closeness, stitching us together with threads too subtle to see. And perhaps most remarkable, the brain does not always require another's hand to feel this connection. Even imagined touch, conjured vividly in memory, can trigger similar neural patterns. The body recalls, as though echoing a promise, you are not alone. You are felt. You are seen. Empathy revives not only the mind's pathways, but the very surface of our being. Through skin, we remember we belong. Through touch, we remember we are alive together. When someone tells you a story about loss, about triumph, about an ordinary walk under extraordinary skies, something remarkable happens inside your brain. Neurons begin to mirror the rhythms of the teller's voice. Emotions flicker in synchrony. A bridge of resonance forms, invisible yet undeniable, carrying their world into yours. This is the quiet alchemy of empathy expressed through narrative. Stories are not mere entertainment. They are vessels for human feeling, encoded in words but delivered in waves of sensation. Neuroscientists have discovered that when you listen to a story filled with emotional detail, your brain does not sit idly by. If a character runs, your motor cortex hums. If the tale describes the smell of rain-soaked earth, your olfactory regions stir. When heartbreak is described, your own emotional circuits flare as if the wound were yours. Stories bypass the surface of logic and plunge straight into the nervous system, where empathy lives. Long before writing, long before cities, humans gathered around fires to weave their inner landscapes into sound. These fireside tales were not just diversions from the dark, they were survival tools. By stepping into the perspective of another, by learning from their fears and triumphs, entire groups grew stronger. Stories, then, were empathy training, rehearsal spaces for compassion, understanding, and collective memory. Modern science now calls this neural coupling, the synchronization of brain activity between speaker and listener. When someone tells you a deeply personal story, your neural rhythms begin to echo theirs. It is as if the mind temporarily sets aside its walls, opening its gates to let another's experience flow in. Empathy here is not just an emotion, but a neurological duet. Think about the books, films, or bedtime stories that linger in you. The ones that made you cry for people who never existed, or rejoice at victories you never fought for. Those tears, those quickened heartbeats, are proof that empathy does not require physical presence. It can travel across ink, across pixels, across centuries. Through stories, we feel with strangers, with ancestors, with imagined lives that remind us of our own fragility and strength. And there is healing in this. Studies show that people struggling with trauma often find release in sharing their stories and in hearing others' journeys mirrored back to them. The act of telling is not just cathartic, it is connective. To say this happened to me is to extend an invitation. Step into my memory, walk through it with me. Empathy accepts, and together, two minds carry what once felt unbearable. Perhaps this is why storytelling feels so natural at night. In the hush of darkness, as defenses soften, we are more willing to step into another's dream. The words drift like smoke, entering us gently, stirring places logic cannot reach. Stories keep alive the reminder that while our lives are separate, our emotions are communal rivers, branching into each other endlessly. To listen with empathy is to let another's narrative rewrite a part of your brain. And to tell with empathy is to offer someone else the chance to be reborn in understanding. This is how narratives carry empathy across minds, one story, one resonance at a time. Sit in a quiet room with someone you trust, someone whose presence softens the edges of your mind. Notice, if you pay attention, how your breaths begin to echo each other, an unconscious dance of inhale and exhale. Your heart rates start to trace similar patterns. This is not coincidence, it is resonance. It is empathy weaving its rhythm through your body. The body is not an isolated machine. It is a choir of signals tuned to those around us. When empathy is present, physiological synchrony emerges. Studies show that when two people share deep connection, their heartbeats can rise and fall together, even when words are not exchanged. Their nervous systems align, pulsing in subtle choreography. It is as though empathy does not just pass between minds, but inhabits the bloodstream itself. Think of mothers cradling infants. Their breathing slows, coaxing the baby's ragged breaths into steadier cadence. Empathy here is more than emotion. It is regulation, a nervous system lending stability to another. Lovers feel this too. Long silences become filled, not with awkwardness, but with the sound of breaths falling into harmony, a reminder that intimacy can exist without speech. Even groups can enter this synchrony. Choirs singing together, crowds chanting, dancers moving in unison, all generate shared physiological states. The collective heartbeat quickens during crescendos, slows during pauses. In these moments, empathy scales outward, knitting many nervous systems into a single organism. It is why shared rituals can feel so powerful. Our bodies are literally resonating with one another. The brain plays conductor in this orchestra. Mirror neurons spark when we watch another's chest rise, when we sense the cadence of their words. But it is deeper than observation, it is willingness. Empathy is what allows us to yield our own tempo, to soften our boundaries, and let someone else's rhythm influence us. It is surrender and union, both fragile and profound. What does this synchrony give us? It grants safety. To breathe with another is to feel we are not alone in the vastness of the world. It grants healing, for synchrony lowers stress markers, calms erratic thoughts, and fosters emotional balance. And it grants meaning. For when our rhythms align, we feel part of something larger, something beyond the self. There is also a mystical quality here. Across cultures, breath is sacred. Prana, chi, ruach, the vital wind. To share breath, to fall into rhythm together, is to touch that mystery. Empathy, in this sense, is a spiritual act, aligning us not only with one another, but with the pulse of life itself. So next time you find yourself beside someone you care for, pause and listen. Inhale, exhale. Notice how your rhythms meet, how your bodies converse without words. Empathy revives the brain, not just in thoughts and emotions, but in the very cadence of existence, reminding us that to live together is to breathe together. There are moments when words fail us, when grief is too large for syllables, when awe is too vast to compress into sound, when love is too delicate to be clumsy with speech. In those spaces, silence steps forward, not as emptiness, but as presence. And within that silence, empathy breathes its truest form. The warmth you feel in response is not symbolic. It is literal activation, your nervous system mirroring theirs, your body rehearsing their delight. Empathy here is not a concept, but a bodily truth. And like all truths of the brain, it can grow. Mindfulness practices sharpen insular activity, teaching the mind to listen more closely to the body's signals. People who train in compassion meditation often show thicker grey matter in this region, their insula honed to detect subtle shifts in emotional weather. The more we attend, the clearer the whisper becomes. What makes the insula so mysterious is its dual gaze. It looks inward, mapping the hidden landscapes of heartbeat, breath, and gut, and it looks outward, aligning those inner landscapes with the emotions of others. It is the meeting place of self and world, the quiet chamber where empathy begins to take form. Perhaps this is why acts of empathy feel so deeply embodied. They are not just mental choices, they are felt truths. When you sit with someone in silence, when your body leans unconsciously toward theirs, when your chest aches at their sorrow, the insula is at work, translating presence into resonance. Empathy revives the brain because it revives this whisper. It makes us listen not only to our own pulse, but to the shared heartbeat of humanity, faint but persistent, beating just beneath the surface of skin and silence. There is a part of the brain that burns when you see someone suffer. It does not wait for explanation, does not pause for analysis. It simply lights up, as if their wound were carved into your own body. This region is the anterior cingulate cortex, and it is empathy's fire, glowing whenever another's pain crosses into your awareness. Picture a friend stubbing their toe. Instantly you wince. You may even mutter an involuntary ouch, though nothing has touched you. This reaction is not politeness. It is circuitry. The anterior cingulate does not distinguish between your pain and theirs. It blurs the line, insisting that their agony belongs to you as well. This is why watching suffering is difficult. Not because it is abstractly sad, but because your brain is literally simulating the experience. Empathy here is not symbolic. It is visceral, encoded in flesh and electricity. The same region that processes your own injury ignites when you witness harm to another. The nervous system does not ask permission. It simply joins. Yet the anterior cingulate is not only about pain, it is about attention to suffering. It prioritizes what matters most in the emotional landscape. A broken bone, a trembling voice, a subtle flicker of distress. All rise like flames into conscious awareness through this region. Without it, we might still notice suffering, but it would remain distant, unimportant, unclaimed. With it, empathy becomes unavoidable, a call to action ringing within the brain. But there is complexity in this fire. If the flame grows too hot, it overwhelms. Some people drown in empathic distress, unable to separate their own nervous system from the storms of others. This is where regulation must enter, where other brain regions step in to balance the blaze. Empathy requires not just the anterior cingulate's raw ignition, but also the wisdom of modulation. Think of doctors, nurses, caregivers, those who face suffering daily. Their anterior cingulate burns brightly, but over time, many learn to temper it with perspective taking, to let the fire warm without consuming. This balance between feeling and holding becomes the essence of sustainable compassion, and this fire is teachable. Research shows that empathy training strengthens connectivity between the anterior cingulate and frontal regions that regulate emotion. The result is a brain better able to feel without collapsing, to respond with clarity rather than overwhelm. Empathy, then, is not just inherited. It is cultivated like a flame tended carefully over time. So when you flinch at another's pain, when you feel their sorrow like a weight inside your chest, know this: your brain is not betraying you with weakness. It is showing you its design. It is reminding you that to be human is to share fire, to carry each other's pain so that no one has to burn alone. The anterior cingulate revives our brains by insisting that suffering is never solitary. Through its fire, empathy keeps the world alive with connection. If the anterior cingulate is empathy's fire, then the prefrontal cortex is its bridge, the structure that takes raw emotion and shapes it into meaning, into choice, into compassion that lasts beyond the moment. Without this bridge, we might drown in sensation. With it, we can carry empathy into action. The prefrontal cortex rests at the very front of the brain, like a watchtower surveying both inner storms and outer landscapes. It receives the heat of another's suffering from the anterior cingulate, the whisper of bodily resonance from the insula, the spark of recognition from mirror neurons. And then it asks, what does this mean? And what shall I do? This is where empathy matures. A child may cry when seeing another child fall, feeling distress without knowing what to do. An adult, guided by the prefrontal cortex, feels the same resonance, but translates it into action, offering a hand, finding help, speaking comfort. The bridge transforms empathy from echo into expression. Neuroscience shows that perspective taking, the ability to imagine another's thoughts and circumstances, relies heavily on this region. When you step into someone else's shoes, it is the prefrontal cortex that laces them up for you. It does not erase yourself, it stretches your awareness outward, creating space for another within the architecture of your mind. Yet this bridge is delicate. Stress and exhaustion weaken it, making empathy collapse into either detachment or overwhelm. Trauma can shrink its capacity, leaving people trapped in loops of raw emotion or cut off from feeling altogether. But the bridge is also flexible. Practices like mindfulness, reflective journaling, and even deliberate acts of kindness strengthen its structure, making empathy more resilient. Consider conflict. When anger surges, the anterior cingulate lights with pain, your own or another's. The insula churns with bodily heat. Left unchecked, this storm could erupt into cruelty, but the prefrontal cortex steps in like a mediator, reminding you of context, of perspective, of consequences. It softens the fire, guiding it toward understanding instead of harm. Empathy here is not just about feeling another's pain, but about choosing how to respond with wisdom. And in this lies one of empathy's most vital gifts: foresight. The prefrontal cortex allows you to imagine how your actions will ripple into another's world. It lets you pause before a harsh word, reconsider before indifference, reshape instinct into care. In its quiet way, it prevents countless fractures in the human web. So when empathy feels like both weight and light, both burden and gift, remember this: the prefrontal bridge is at work. It is translating the rawness of sensation into the language of choice. It is carrying empathy from the body into the world. From feeling into doing, empathy revives the brain not just by making us feel more, but by making us understand more deeply and then giving us the strength to act on that understanding. And so, dear listener, we come to the quiet closing of tonight's journey. We have wandered through the hidden landscapes of empathy, the mirror neurons that let us feel another's movements, the insula that whispers the weight of their emotion, the cingulate that burns with their pain, the prefrontal bridge that carries it all into understanding. Empathy is not weakness. It is not fragility. It is a living architecture within us, a symphony of circuits that, when awakened, stitch us back into the fabric of one another. It calms loneliness, softens anger, and turns silent moments into connection. When your day feels heavy, when your thoughts circle restlessly, remember, empathy is both an offering and a refuge. To feel another's sorrow is also to feel less alone in your own. To share in their joy is to magnify your own light. Each breath of understanding, each gesture of kindness, reshapes the brain, revives the spirit, and strengthens the web that binds us together. So let this be your final thought as you drift towards sleep. You are never apart from the world. You are part of it, woven by invisible threads of empathy. And in the quiet rhythm of your heart, in the gentle rise and fall of your breath, you carry the proof that we are designed not only to think, but to feel together. Rest easy, and may your dreams tonight be kind, luminous, and deeply human. This is Mind Peace. Until next time.